All right, it's good to see all of you tonight. It's a much warmer night than it has been, so I'm excited for that. Glad that you're here to be with us in our Wednesday night Bible class. We're going to pick up in James chapter 3. So if you have your Bibles, we invite your attention there in James chapter 3. And we just concluded the second section of this chapter, and we'll talk about the third section of this chapter tonight. And then Sunday we'll move on to chapter 4. So anyway, we're glad that you're here tonight. There was a man who dialed the wrong number, and the answering machine answered the phone, and the guy on the other end, he had no idea who it was. But anyway, the answering machine was sort of weird. It said, "Hey, this is so-and-so. I'm making a lot of changes in my life right now, so leave your name and number, and if I don't call you back, then you're one of those changes that I'm making." But you know, this book to me is a lot about changes. It's a lot about seeing a faith that will go somewhere, that will do something. Somebody said that faith is prayer with legs on it. And I think that's what this book is really about. It's about putting faith into action. And chapter 3 is sort of a very personal chapter. You know, he begins talking about being ready to become teachers. And he talks about how not everybody is ready to do that. You know, he said, don't be hasty to become teachers, because we shall receive the greater condemnation. Then he talked about something that all of us experience, that is with the tongue. So he talked about a lot of things. He spent about 10 verses on that, and it was a pretty big deal. In fact, I'll notice one thing there. He said, verse 6, "The tongue is a fire, a world of iniquity. So is the tongue among our members, that it defiles the whole body, and is set on fire the course of nature, and is set on fires of hell. For every kind of beast, and of birds, and of serpents, of things of the sea is tamed, and hath been tamed of mankind. But the tongue," what? "Can no man tame." It's impossible. He says any person that has a tongue will battle with it his entire life. I've known some preachers that I thought really had mastered it. I think Al Franks was one. There are some others. But, you know, I think that most of us it'll take some time. You know, I'm still a young man, still got a lot to learn. But I am getting older. I think I've learned more in the last 5 years than I've ever learned in my life. And I think I've learned more about myself in the last 5 years than I've ever learned in my life. So I think we're always learning, we're always growing, and certainly that's not always a bad thing. Okay, tonight, chapter 3, the responsibility. Okay, chapter 3 is all about the responsibility of a faith that works. And we talked a little bit about, I'm going to ask the guy in the back to touch the screen there so I can advance the slide. All right, so we've got the responsibility of teachers. The responsibility with the tongue, the responsibility with the truth, and this last one is what we're going to talk about tonight. Now, James calls it something different. He calls it wisdom. Now, I needed something that began with the letter T. All right? When I study these, I have to always have things begin with the same letter. It just helps me. But the truth is mentioned. In fact, if you look here, verse 14, James 3. In fact, will somebody read that for us?
14.
Yes.
"But if ye have bitter everything, envying and strife in your hearts, glory not, and lie not against the truth."
Okay, so the truth is involved in the wisdom. Okay, so I sort of needed a heading to describe the last part of the chapter, and that's sort of the way that I described it. So we talked about teachers, we talked about the tongue, and tonight, I'm going to talk about the truth. Let's look at verse 13. "Who is a wise man and endued with knowledge among you? Let him show out of a good conversation his works with meekness of wisdom." So this section that we call the truth is about the truth of wisdom. Now, if you were to teach this verse to somebody, what are some words that stand out to you? Meekness, definitely so. Yes, we're going to talk about meekness all throughout this section. He describes it as one of the fruits of righteousness in just a moment. Okay, what else? How many of you have the King James Version? I'm just curious. Okay, just a regular good old, they call that the authorized version, right? I've gotten to where I lean on some other ones pretty heavy. And I'll tell you one of the reasons why. Because the word conversation, and I'm using the King James here tonight, but I do also use the ESV. It's a newer translation that even some of our brethren who are scholars are preaching from it every Sunday, such as Dan Winkler and some others. So anyway, I started using it some. Now, the reason why I haven't totally made the switch yet is because all of my memory work is from the King James. So it's easier for me to prepare lessons from the King James. But let's focus on a word here. Verse 13, he said, "Who is a wise man endued with knowledge among you? Let him show out of a good," what? Conversation. What are some of your modern translations say there? Who has a more modern translation? Conduct. Conduct. Miss Bonnie, what do you have there?
I'm just going to read the whole.
Okay, yeah, that'll help.
If you are wise and understand God's ways, live a life of steady goodness, so that only good deeds will pour forward. And if you don't brag about the good you do, then you will be truly wise.
Okay, yeah, good. I think yours is using the phrase good deeds there. Okay? Conduct, good deed. Now, here's why I mention this. For instance, what does the word conversation mean today? Yeah, we're just talking, right? You know, we say, well, I saw so-and-so and we had a conversation. Well, when the King James Bible was translated, what year was that, by the way? 1611, right? That's a long time ago. That's 400 years ago. So when they use the term conversation, it's not like we use it today. You see, languages evolve. Even the English language evolves. So when somebody in 1611 is reading the Bible and they read James chapter 3 and verse 13, they are not thinking about what a person is saying. They're thinking about what a person is doing. Now, it would be involved. This would be involved. Okay? For instance, let me give you some other Bible verses with the King James, and I think you'll see what we're talking about here. Okay? And what I did is I looked up the word conversation, and I found some other passages, and I want to show it to you. So here's what I want to do. If you have a modern translation, will you go to each of these verses? Okay? And we'll read them from the King James, and then we'll read them from maybe, I've got an ESV here too. And I'll sort of read one of them. In fact, I'll read this first one, Ephesians 4:22. Okay? So the King James is on the screen. I'll show you the difference in what is going on here. You know, some people would think that it's a mistranslation or a bad translation. That's not necessarily the case. The language was just different back then. Okay? All right. ESV. Here's what it says. Ephesians 4:22. "Put off your old self, which belongs to your former manner of life." King James says conversation. This one calls it manner of life. "Your former manner of life, which is corrupt through deceitful desires, and be renewed in the spirit of your minds, and to put on the new self, created after the likeness of God in true righteousness and holiness." So, what I'm trying to hopefully help you see tonight is that the word conversation, when you read it in the King James, it doesn't have much to do with what a person is saying. Although that may be included. It is literally the way that he is living. All right, let's try another one. 1 Peter chapter 1, verse 13 through 15. The King James, he said, "Wherefore gird up the loins of your mind and be sober, and hope to the end for the grace that is to be brought unto you at the revelation of Jesus Christ, as obedient children, not fashioning yourselves according to the former lust in your ignorance. But as he which has called you is holy, so be ye holy in all manner of," notice, conversation. He's talking about a way that a man lives. That would include what he is saying, but literally in the context, he's talking about a way that a man lives. All right, who has that in a modern translation? Maybe even an NIV. I don't usually like the NIV, but if you have it, sometimes I refer to it. Anybody? All right, go ahead.
So think clearly and exercise self-control. Look forward to the special blessings that will come to you in the return of Jesus Christ. Obey God because you are His children. Thus look back into your own ways of doing evil. You didn't know any better then, but now you must be holy in everything you do, just as God chose you to be His children.
Okay, yeah, that's good. That's good. Thank you. Yeah, be holy in everything you do. This is the way that a man lives. Uh-huh. Okay, yeah. Okay, good. Sure enough. Your husband told me about that earlier. Thank you. Appreciate it. All right. I'll see what this one says. 1 Peter 1, 13 through 15. All right, the others I'll just notice not in so much detail. Therefore, preparing your minds for action, being sober-minded, set your hope fully on the grace that will be brought to you at the revelation of Jesus Christ. As obedient children, do not be conformed to the passions of your former ignorance, but as He who has called you is holy, you also be holy in all your conduct. In your conduct. King James says conversation, okay? So now, like, this will help you whenever you're doing your personal reading at night or whatever, and you come across this idea in the New Testament, and I want to tell you, 9 times out of 10, it's going to mean more than just what a man is saying. All right, I'll give you 2 more. And all the rest of these are in the book of Peter. 1 Peter 3, verses 1 and 2. Likewise, you wives, be in subjection to your own husbands, that if any obey not the word, he will be won by, notice, the conversation of the wife. You know what he's talking about? Let's say a couple gets married and the husband is not a Christian. And over time, he will watch her and notice how she lives. And she won't even have to preach to him the Bible. She won't even have to open her Bible and teach him because of her manner of life. He will obey. That's what he's talking about. The wife, when she's in subjection to her husband, if he's not a Christian, he will eventually obey the gospel. Now, if it's the other way and she's, all over him all the time and nagging him and whatever else, she's an unsubmissive wife, he begins to build up this sort of irritation for her. And that will push him away. That's his whole point here in chapter 3. Don't push him away, is what he's saying. Her conversation. All right, I'll give you one more. Chapter 3, verse 16. Having a good conscience, that whereas that they speak evil of you as evildoers, they may be ashamed which falsely accuse your good conversation in Christ. The way that you live, they cannot pin you in a corner, is the idea. All right, any question or comments? Okay. There was a prisoner who was in jail, and this was a reoccurring thing. He would get out of jail and he would get caught selling drugs and go back to jail. He'd been to jail several times. So anyway, the jail worker there noticed him and thought that he was really wanting to change. So she tried to help him. And she asked him, do you really want to change your life? He said, yeah, I do. I really want to change my life. I'm tired of going to jail. So she tried to help him find a career path to even study while he was in jail so that when he got out, he could eventually find a good job. And they both looked and looked and looked and thought about what he wanted to do. And he said, I think I want to go to school and learn how to be an electrician. So she thought, well, that's great. I'll gather up any information I can find. And she got a whole stack of stuff and found out all this information. And he asked her, he said, well, how much does an electrician make a year? And they dug and they found out how much an electrician made every year. And he said, I can make that in 2 months. I can make that in 2 months selling drugs. He said, don't worry about it. I'll just keep coming back to jail. You see, he wasn't willing to put in the work. You know, doing the right thing is hard, isn't it? Tonight, I want to ask you, when you made that decision to change your life, how easy was that for you? How many people in this room have ever smoked before? Just curious. If you don't want to tell, you don't have to, okay? One of the hardest things I ever did in my life was quit smoking. And if you've never smoked for any amount of time, you don't know what that's like. You know, and I hear people try to talk, you know, they're like, well, I quit doing this or doing that, and it was hard. But let me tell you something. It's like somebody came to you and said, you have to quit eating. You can't do that. The whole time your stomach is growling, the only thing you're thinking about is food. I remember I tried 1,000 times probably. Who knows how many times I tried before I finally quit. Sometimes I'd quit for 3 or 4 days. Sometimes I'd quit for 3 or 4 weeks. It's the hardest thing I ever did in my life. You remember when you felt like that? James is describing times where we have to be wise and do the right thing, but it's not easy. It's like when you decide you're going to quit smoking. It's hard to do. All right. So now that we've got that word in our minds, we know what this is. I found this to really sum up what this means is, to me, it says it right here in this picture. Okay? When we take off the armor of God, we sink. But when we wear the armor of God, we stay afloat. Now, I never knew that would happen until I saw this picture, but it made sense to me. You know, the protective coating on the orange is what keeps it orange. If that orange doesn't get eaten without the peel, it's going to rot. It needs a protection. James is describing this wisdom as protection. Now notice verse 13. He said, who is a wise man endued with knowledge among you? Let him show out of a good conversation his works with, what, James? With meekness. He said it earlier, so. With meekness. What is that? Okay, yeah, that would include, it's humility, right? It's humility. But it even goes a little bit deeper. If you were to describe a meek person, how would you describe it? Yeah, quiet, patient, humble. Definitely so. You know, when I think of meekness, that's what I think of. A tame stallion. Something that has the power to run over you, but chooses not to. Now, I've been seeing these videos of Josh Ward's son, you know, Shane, and his grandson, the oldest one, Trace, I think is his name. And he's started something that I've always wanted to do. He started riding bulls. And I thought to myself, man, that looks like so much fun. This fella is probably not even this tall. He may be 13 or 14 years old, and he's learning how to ride bulls. And I thought to myself, that's on my bucket list. So before I die, I hope the Lord will let me jump out of a plane, and I hope He'll let me ride a bull. But you know, even those smaller calf-sized bulls, you know, their horns are a little bit smaller. You can tell that's not a full-grown bull. But as soon as they open that gate, that little bull is going crazy. He's kicking, throwing his head around, trying to get that strap off of his belly. They're not just kicking because something's on their back. Did you know that? A lot of people don't know that. They put that strap under their belly, and I guess you can know what it's hurting, and they're trying to get it off. So it's not just they're trying to buck somebody off their backs. They are literally trying to figure out what's causing that pain. Okay? So that bull is literally going crazy. That's why he's jumping around like that. So, a bull is not meek at all. He's unpredictable. In fact, even when a bull is all by himself, if you go in his cage, you give him just a minute and he's going to start blowing. And if he does and you're still not getting out of there, he's going to start stomping his feet. And he may even do this, And it's time to get out of there. But that horse, if it's tame, you could take your little child up to that fence and he'll come over and stick his head down, and your little 2-year-old child could pet his head. A wise man, James said, a wise man shows his good works with gentleness of wisdom. He's a gentle person. He's not a bull. If you come into his ring, he's not trying to kick you out of it. The greatest, meekest man was Jesus himself. He said, "Come unto me, all you that labor and are heavy laden, and I'll give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn of me, for I am meek and lowly in heart, and you'll find rest unto your souls." Jesus was a wise, wise man. Now, how do we conduct this wisdom? Let's continue. I'm going too slow if I'm going to finish this tonight. So let's speed this up a little bit. Verse 14 and 15. If you have bitter envying and strife in your hearts, glory not and lie not against the truth. This wisdom descendeth not from above, but is earthly and sensual and devilish. For where envying and strife is, there is confusion and every evil work. All right. It's interesting that James talks a lot about devils and demons in his book. He said, a faith without works is like a man that has a devil. He said, a man that causes strife and digs up dirt on people, he's like a devil. Let's apply some of these principles tonight. All right. Let's go to Proverbs chapter 16. All right, I'm going to give you 4 from the book of Proverbs, and then I'm going to move on because I don't have much time, okay? So let's go Proverbs 16, Proverbs chapter 20, and then Proverbs chapter 26. There was a monk who was training at this monastery, and when he first arrived, they told him he could only say 2 words every year. So at the end of the first year, he said, "Food bad." The end of the second year, he said, "Hard bed." The end of the third year, he said, "I quit." And the guy looked at him and said, "Good, because all you've done is complain since you've been here." I've known some brethren that were like that. If I'm not careful, I can be like that. You ever felt that way? I'm not singling anyone out here because I'm not better than anyone else. There have come times when I thought, you know what, this is ridiculous. I can't take one more day. And then I'll get over it. Wake up in the morning, feel a little bit better. I'm like, whew, I just made it through the day, Notice what he says here about this evil thinking, okay, the devilish envying and strife that comes up here. He says, verse 17, the wisdom that is from above is pure, peaceable, gentle, easy to be entreated, full of mercy, good fruits, without partiality, without hypocrisy. Now, we're going to make some application here in just a moment. Let's go to these verses. Proverbs 16, 27 and 28. I'll tell you what, I'm going to ask some people to read so we can sort of speed this up. Mr. David, will you go to Proverbs chapter 20 and verse 3? Miss Linda, will you go to Proverbs chapter 26 and verse 17? So I'll notice these and then we'll move on to our applications. He said, an ungodly man digs up evil, and in his lips there is a burning fire. A froward man, notice, he sows strife. And a whisperer separateth chief friends. I'll just be honest with you. If I know people are gossiping about me, I avoid them. I try my very best just to stay away. If I can even avoid shaking their hand, I will avoid shaking their hand. It's not that I don't like them. I just don't want to give them any more ammo. You know what I mean? I don't want to give them anything else to say, so I'm going to keep my distance. I'm still going to love them. I'll still even be kind to them. If I have to, I'll shake their hand. I'll smile. I'll say, I hope you have a good day, because I genuinely do hope they do. But if I know they're gossiping about someone else, I know they're gossiping about me. So for the most part, I've just learned to keep my distance. A whisperer, he separates friends. All right, Proverbs chapter 20, verse 3.
Keeping away from strife is an honor for a man, but any fool will.
Okay. He's looking for a battle. We'll talk about that in just a minute. All right, the next one. Okay. It's pretty simple wisdom, isn't it? Sweetest dog I ever had was a Great Dane, and she just passed away, I think, last year or so. Her name was Bella, and I knew from the very start she was a good dog because she was about 6 months old, maybe, or something like that, maybe less than a year, and she was just the sweetest little puppy. And we were in Meridian, and my wife told me what was going on. And she heard this crying, like the dog was crying, and she peeked her head around the corner, and I don't remember which child it was, but one of my children had the pliers and had clipped her ear and was pulling it. And I remember when I heard about this, I'm thinking, she didn't even growl. She didn't even try to snip at the child or anything. She just cried like she knew not to growl or bite. I knew at that moment that is a good dog. And she was the best dog I ever had. I mean, I really mean that. She was smart. She obeyed well. Never had a problem out of her. But you ever had one of those dogs that you just really didn't like? You open the door and they're like, boom, you know, you're like, come back here, hey! You're out there running, they're making you look like a fool, you know. You're running around trying to get the dog, and you go to get it, and they run off, and you're like, oh. I had one like that, too. She got run over right out in that driveway about 2 years ago or so by one of the Rainbow moms. We had to take her to the vet, and anyway, it was going to cost an arm and a leg to fix her, and we had to put her down. But I mean, we still talk about that dog because she wouldn't listen to nobody. What if you grab a dog by its ears? What do you think it's going to do? I worked at a vet when I was younger as a teenager, and I didn't work there very long. I didn't last long at any job I had, but I remember they were trying to feed this little Dachshund a pill, you know, and all these techs, like I'm this little kennel guy, you know, I just work in the back and walk the dogs and stuff, and they were trying to open this Dachshund's mouth, and they're like, he's going to bite me. I was like, oh, it's a Dachshund. I said, give me that. I went, and that dog bit me so fast, I didn't know what hit me. I mean, it was like a lightning bolt. I thought I had enough strength just to hold his mouth, and I mean, before, I couldn't even do anything. He had my finger in his mouth. man that looks for a fight, he'll usually find a dog. He will. Think about this passage in Proverbs 26 and verse 20. He said, where no wood is, the fire goes out, and where there is no talebearer, the strife ceases. And as coals are to burning coals, and wood to a fire, so is a contentious man to kindle strife. The words of a talebearer are as wounds. They go down into the innermost parts of the belly. And I want to tell you, we've all experienced that. You find out somebody said something behind your back, and it just kills you. To this day, I still don't understand why people do that sometimes. I think, what did I ever do to that person, you know? It's just the way people are, I reckon. All right, let's make some applications. Let's talk about some good things. I got about 6 minutes here. You look there in verse 17. He said, the wisdom from above, notice, it's pure, it's peaceable, it's gentle, it's easy to be entreated, full of mercy and good fruits, without partiality, without hypocrisy. The fruit of righteousness is sown in peace of them that make peace. So, if I say tonight, I want to have good, godly wisdom, these are the things I start with. Okay? So I prepared the last part of this lesson surrounding this idea. Now, what I found is, when I was looking at some of these words, there are 3 of these words that are used in this passage that are used nowhere else in the New Testament. Okay, the only times that these words are found are right here. One of those is when he talks about the peace, making peace. Let's see. Maybe it's peacemaker from Matthew chapter 5. I'll have to double check that here in just a minute. All right, don't want to get ahead of myself. Number 1, he said the wisdom that is from above is first pure. When I was looking at these, I thought, these are all taught in the Sermon on the Mount. I mean, think about it. Jesus said in the Sermon on the Mount, blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. You look at the next one. What else does he mention there? It is peaceable. That's the only time this word is used in the New Testament. Well, Jesus said, blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called the children of God, in the Sermon on the Mount. Now, what do they call this? The peacemaker. 1873, it's a Colt 45. And of course, this one on the screen is a replica of it. That's not an original. But I wonder, if you owned an original, how much it would be worth. Man, that'd be worth a lot of money. But that's what they gave this gun its name. It was a very popular gun in that time. And when people settled their disputes, that's what they used. I mean, you think about the westerns that you see on the television. I mean, 2 men stand back to back. They take, 8 or 10 paces, and they turn around and pow, pow, pow. Called it the peacemaker. But that's not peaceful at all. Real peace is settling it God's way. All right. Somebody read verse 18. James 3, verse 18, then I'm going to move on. Okay. That's a fruit of righteousness. Making peace. All right. Then you see it says it is gentle. Okay, it's gentle. I think about Isaiah 53 and verse 7 when it says 2 times, this is a prophecy about Jesus, by the way, when he was crucified, that he opened not his mouth. He didn't even say a word. He was gentle. So not only are the wisdom peaceable, gentle, but I like this, it's easy to be entreated. You know, you think about that dog that you had that's so obedient, like Bella, my Great Dane, that's what this means. It can easily be told what to do. You know, it's like an older, wiser man comes to us and says, hey, you know, it'd probably be a good idea if you thought about this before you did it next time. You may get upset at first, but we go home, we think about it, and we call him back later and we say, you know what? You're right. And I will. I'll think about it next time. Easy to be entreated. That's a wise man. 1 John chapter 2, verse 1, he said, "My little children, write unto you that you do not sin, and if any man sin, we have an advocate with the Father." Someone who is easy to listen. Jesus is easy to listen. That's what that means. He's an advocate. Easy to be entreated. And then he uses the word mercy. What did Jesus say in the Sermon on the Mount about mercy? Blessed are the merciful, for they shall obtain mercy. There's another one. It's in the Sermon on the Mount. By the way, the phrase easy to be entreated, it's only found right here in the New Testament. It's used nowhere else in the New Testament. Mercy, it's used a bunch. Okay, that's a common phrase in the New Testament. Full of good fruits, he said. This guy that is wise, he is full of good fruits. You know, he's trying to be involved in every area. Now, that's something probably that we all struggle with, but for the most part, it is doable. We can all be involved in some way or another. He said, by their fruits, you'll know them. If you want to know what a man is like, just see what he does on a daily basis. Who his friends are, where he's involved, where he spends his money, all those types of things. He said, without partiality. A man who is wise is without partiality. This is the only time this phrase is used in the New Testament as well. It's found nowhere else in the Bible. Now, the opposite of it was found in James chapter 2, verse 1. When he said, have the faith of our Lord Jesus Christ without the respect of persons. That is a respect of persons and without partiality. Those are two different extremes, right? He doesn't play the favorite. That's the idea. Now, the last one. Without hypocrisy. What's a hypocrite? I was thinking about that today. I was like, well, I'm concluding the lesson, but what exactly is a hypocrite? We say, well, someone who says but does not do. Well, how many of us have ever done that? All of us. You know, we'll say something, we say to our kids, you know, I used to tell my kids all the time, I said, do not say shut up. You know what I catch myself saying to my kids sometimes? And I feel bad when I do it. Would y'all shut up? One time my mom said that in Manna. She said, ooh, Mimi, you said shut up. So she came back and told me, she said, I'm not supposed to say that, am I? I said, well, sometimes I do it too. Without sincerity. That's what that word means. It's not in his heart. He's at church, but he's really not. That's a hypocrite. All right, thank you.